We've all heard about the CMMC. At least, if you're watching this right now, I hope you've heard of the CMMC. But now we're hearing about the CMMI. What is the CMMI, and why are we hearing about it in conjunction with the CMMC?
Hi, I'm Leslie Weinstein, and this is DibTech Talk, a show where we make sense of all things cybersecurity for the defense industrial base. In this series, I'll introduce you to cybersecurity concepts and industry experts. I'll also review innovative products and solutions to help you implement and manage your cybersecurity program. Let's dig right in.
The CMMI is the older and more mature sister of the CMMC. It too was created by Carnegie Mellon, and it stands for the Capability Maturity Model Integration. Just like the CMMC, the CMMI allows for a third-party verification of implementation of your processes and procedures. I wanted to make the connection between these two maturity models because we know very little about the CMMC assessment process, but I think we can gain some valuable insight and information about the CMMC process by understanding more about the CMMI process. Today I'm interviewing Maggie. Maggie is a CMMI Lead Appraiser, and she's also been recently selected as a CMMC Provisional Assessor. Stay tuned as Maggie and I deconstruct the CMMI appraisal process and pontificate about the relevance and applicability to the CMMC process.
Cybersecurity policies are critical to the foundation of your CMMC, NIST, CMMI, and other framework implementation efforts. With Policy Pro, even a small organization with limited IT resources can easily create and maintain an important library of policies without dropping tons of time and money on consultants. Policy Pro is a web-based policy generation tool aided by machine learning that allows you to create and score the policies and procedures required by CMMC maturity levels 2 and 3. Curious about Policy Pro? Click on the link below for additional information and to start your free trial today.
Maggie, I just want to thank you for joining me on my second episode of the DibTech Talk podcast, where we talk about all things relevant to the defense industrial base. So I invited you on because you are a CMMI Lead Appraiser, and some people might think that CMMI not necessarily relevant to the entire DIB, but as I will let you explain, how CMMI is relevant. So if you could just take a second to introduce yourself and
Sure.
what CMMI is.
Well, thank you very much for actually asking me to come back. And it's really nice to always speak with you, Leslie. It's always fun and pleasurable. I just learn so much from you too when I speak to you anytime. But CMMI Lead Appraiser. Okay, let's see. What do we want to say? Basically, the whole thing about being a lead appraiser, and steer me if I go wrong or if I go off, and you can edit that out. But I guess the whole idea is that I've been as lead appraiser, I hate to say this, 20 years now, at least. That's frightening.
You're not old enough to have done this for 20 years.
And still have my brains about me. The fun thing about it and the different thing about it is you go into a company, it doesn't really matter whether they're making cupcakes or jet aircraft. You could be working with a company like Lockheed Martin, you could be working with a company down the road that's 10 people. There's no limit on size either way. So the beauty of CMMI is it's just a set of best practices. It's nothing like, it's not rocket science, because I used to teach rocket science in the Air Force, and it's not that hard. And it's just best practices that, if you really sit and think about it, it's common sense. It's not hard. It doesn't have to be onerous. It doesn't have to keep you up at night worrying, how am I going to write this next policy? Or, oh my God, somebody's going to come in and appraise me. It's just best practices that have been around since software's been invented, basically.
So what does CMMI stand for, and what exactly is it? Is it a maturity model just like CMMC?
Yes. That's the thing about the two of them. They're wonderful. They're maturity models, which before I go into what it stands for, I just want to say that, so I'm also an ISO 9000 and 27000 and 5 other ISO lead auditor. And yes, ISO is if any of you out there have done ISO 9000 or implemented it, it's binary. It's you made it or you didn't.
So what is ISO 9000?
I'm sorry, ISO 9000 is a quality management system. ISO, International Standards Organization. A lot of our folks who are in DIB have to also be ISO certified.
Okay.
Yeah. No, another thing. It's very good for the GSA schedule when you want to bid on contracts to have that. So most of my clients have 9 which is quality management, 20,000, which is information systems, and 27,000, which is information security, which goes really well with CMMC. But anyway, so CMMI, the difference, and I just want to stress this because CMMI and CMMC are both, as you said, maturity models. The beauty with a maturity model is you get to mature through the model. You get to start out, as just getting into it, trying to understand what it is at what we call maturity level 1, maturity level 2. You gradually get there after you put some processes in place, policies, best practices, again, nothing crazy, and get your projects in line, kind of like PMP stuff that you would want to get in place. That would be your maturity level 2, and so on and so forth, all the way to what I like to call process nirvana at maturity level 5, where everything's statistically coordinated and you're doing statistical process control to the point where you don't have to guess anymore and say, if I hire 5 more engineers and send them through JIRA training to be JIRA admins, then I think our productivity is going to increase by 5-fold. No, you can actually have the data and actually figure it out doing something like a regression analysis or analysis between variables, ANOVA testing, any number of statistical tests to prove that your theory is going to work at the higher maturity levels before you implement it. So you don't have to waste time, buying a new tool and training everybody in the 20,000 person organization to find out, oh shoot, that wasn't the tool we thought we were buying. So CMMI, what does it stand for?
So what does it stand for? And can you walk us through kind of what a CMMI appraisal looks like? What do you do as a lead appraiser? Do you have a team of people? How many people do you bring? And what do they do, starting with like any pre-work, being on site, and then maybe anything afterwards?
Well, funnily enough, I'm in the throes of 2 appraisals right now. One in the beginning, one ending. So not at the same time, of course, because you're not allowed to do that. But anyway, so CMMI, Capability Maturity Model Integration. It stands for having the capability and going up in maturity to understand how these best practices can get you, hopefully, a higher quality software product or services. Is also CMI for services, and I'll talk about the new version that came out too. It puts in place processes where you're not guessing anymore for things like, just for an example, like configuration management, which we know is part of CMMC, right? So the beauty of CMMI is that it asks you to do these best practices that are worldwide proven forever, like IEEE standards. You could say that probably some of it came from that. Some of it probably did come from ISO. Some came from the Carnegie Mellon Institute, the Software Engineering Institute, which is a federally funded research and development center. But a lot of these best practices have just been around, and the people at the SEI back in the 80s put it together. The reason they did this is they were hired by the Air Force. It's a federally funded research and development center, like I said, to come up with a better way to kind of grade or to see if the software you were building for the government, the federal government, was going to stand up to what the contract said it should. So instead of just winning a contract because you're the lowest bidder, you're winning it now because you have the capability to say, our organization is certified CMMI level 3 by a lead appraiser who has looked at our processes, who has looked at the products that these processes have produced, and who has judged us against the model to be a particular maturity level. So again, it's just level 2 is just simple project management practice areas now for version 2.
Is there a certain level that most companies have? Like, do most companies get to level 3, or does everybody strive for a 5? Because with the CMMC, the DoD is messaging that most companies will need a 1 or maybe a 3, but hardly any will need a 4 or 5. Is the same thing? It's same thing with CMMI.
Yeah, I would say it's 90% the same. So again, these contracts that come out of the defense industrial base that are coming out where people want to bid on them to win, they have to at least usually be maturity level 3 to bid. It's a competitive advantage. It used to be just a competitive advantage, and now it opens the door for you to bid on these contracts that require level 3 or above. I would say 90% of my clients in the United States stop at level 3. Okay. That's what they find that's all they really need, because level 3, you go from level 2 being project focused to getting your project plan in place, to getting configuration management practices in place, getting some kind of measurements in place, estimates, planning, etc. Those kind of things that you would do in a project. And then for level 3, it's organization wide. It's all the projects coming together to say, these are our organizational standard set of processes for us to work as an organization. In other words, you go to Booz Allen Hamilton, you want to buy a piece of software, you contract with them to make you software, you know they're going to have a standard way of building software at the company if they're maturity level 3. That doesn't mean you can't tailor. Again, this makes sense. This is best practices. You're allowed to tailor all day as long as you have, guess what? Tailoring instructions for different projects, because an agile project is not going to act like a waterfall project. So CMMI is process agnostic with life cycles. In other words, it doesn't force you to be waterfall. And that's a big misunderstanding out there. And I think it's getting better, but it's always been a big misunderstanding that, oh my God, CMI, I have to have this SRS this thick, and nobody gets to do that. It's going to take forever. And we have to deliver the software in 2-week sprints. And oh my God, it's not going to work. And it's like, I say Agile, I'm also an Agile SPC and a certified Scrum Master and DevOps and all that other happy stuff. But Agile and CMI are so well together. It's beautiful. It's a process map and made in heaven for me. So.
Okay, so let's say you were to come and assess me, and I want to get CMMI certified. Is that the correct term?
Certified. Well, the Lead Appraiser doesn't certify you. The CMMI Institute, who's now owned by Osaka, certifies you. I just present all the documentation that I have generated with you to present to them. And
okay, so what would our engagement look like if I were to hire you to do this for me? So what would be the first thing that we do?
The first thing I would say is, Leslie, how many employees do you have?
Oh, and I would say, let's say I have 5. So I have 5 employees.
Okay. And then I would ask you kind of what they do, like who has what type of a role, who's in charge of, say, again, something that CMMC is asking you for, configuration management, meaning, your documentation and your code is locked down, whether you're using SharePoint or SVN or GitHub for your software or what have you. Many of the tools that are out there, you might be keeping user stories in Jira. So if you're a software development, I would ask you, is anybody doing configuration management? And we would go over what it means for CMMI, and is anybody project manager in charge of a project? Does anybody track metrics for your project? How do you handle if one of your 5 people needs to go for, say, Jira training because you've decided to do agile software development? How are those people managed? And also, how do you control and how do you institutionalize to make sure that if you have 2 project managers, say you win a huge contract, Leslie Weinstein gets a new contract, it's in the newspapers. She has to hire 2 more project managers, so now she's got 3. How do you make sure they're all standardized in the way that you want them to work and the way that they manage their projects? So for level 3, that's what I would be looking at. For level 2, they could do whatever they want as long as they're following basic project management principles. For level 3, I would want to ask you, Leslie, what have you put in place to standardize Leslie Weinstein's company to make sure that when somebody comes to buy a piece of software from you, they know what they're getting. They know exactly the quality and the type of your requirements are laid out well, and they get exactly what they want, hopefully when they want it. So it's all about standardization.
Yeah. So for standardization and institutionalization, what are the documentation and policy requirements for, say, a level 3 for CMMI?
Documentation requirements. Yes, we do have those. And that's the biggest nut that a lot of people feel they have to just have documents. And again, it's not those big onerous SRSs anymore. You can have, since we have a lot of clients I have a lot of clients in the defense industrial base who are doing Agile, they can have their user stories, which would be requirements, in Jira. It makes my life easier too, to just say, show me Jira, show me your user stories, show me how you do estimation, which is another practice area in version 2. How do you do estimation? How do you do monitor and control? Well, if you have a daily Scrum meeting, a stand-up, you're doing monitor and controlling by asking everybody, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? And what did you have problems with? Beautiful. So right there, you're doing planning, you're doing estimating, you're doing monitor and controlling. So those are 3 different practice areas that you have to subscribe to for maturity level 2 and beyond. So the whole idea is that I would come to you and I would say, what are you doing now? I would ask you, hey, Leslie, let's sit down. Show me what you do now. Show me what you have. Do you have any processes in place? Do you have any policies in place? Because those are very important to say, this is what we do. This is how we do work. This is how we, generate results. This is how we answer our clients. Policies in place, procedures in place. And that's where that documentation comes in. it's hard to explain to somebody else, this is how my job is done unless it's written down. I mean, how many times do you go somewhere, and especially in the summertime, right? Say you, like me, I have an Airstream, okay? I have an Airstream trailer. I brought it to the dealer 2 weeks ago. It needs a part. There's one guy working on it. And he was on vacation last week. And I'm like, dude, if you win the lottery tomorrow, and I want to say get hit by a bus because we used to say that, but that's negative connotation. I said, if you won the lottery tomorrow and you left this job, how would anybody know that you're waiting for my part for my Airstream? It's like that's the kind of thing that I'm always flabbergasted that smaller companies, and you can still have things written down when somebody isn't around, whether they're sick or on vacation or they leave the company unexpectedly. What do you do to backfill them? So if they have their procedures, if they have their processes written down, at least you know where they are in what they were doing in their position in their tasks, and tasks complete, estimations, things like that. That's why writing things down makes so much sense. And again, the beauty of Agile is it's usually a team working together, and CMMI again totally supports that type of software development.
So do you read every line of their policies in this process?
Well, because I'm kind of OCD, yes.
Okay, do most CMMI assessments involve reading every single piece of policy that they have to make sure that it's institutionalized?
I would say most CMMI lead appraisers read. We read enough. Let's put it. I'll answer it correctly. We need enough to make a judgment. Yeah, I'm not going to read everything you have. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. But sometimes I'm interested. Sometimes I find things really interesting and I can't stop. But yeah, we read enough to make sure that you have a policy in place, so that you have procedures in place, that you've been trained on those procedures. You have training records, so if you, Leslie, said, yeah, I've got 3 project managers in my new company now because we got so busy, I had to hire 2 more people. It was a wonderful, happy thing. And I'm going to ask you, okay, Leslie, do you have training? Do you have a training process? Do you have a training procedure that says every project manager that you hire has to have PMP certification? And you would say, yes, Maggie, I do have that as a standard. And I would say, okay, show me the results. Show me that they did have the PMP. I want to see the certificate or a training plan that supports them going to get their certificate maybe in 2 or 3 months from now.
Okay.
So that's the threads I would follow.
Yeah, no, that's good. And it's super relevant because you just found out you're a CMMC provisional assessor.
I did last night. I was like, woohoo.
Yeah. So when do you go to training? What are the next steps? What do the next few months of your life look like now that you're in this provisional program?
Well, the next 2 months of my life are full of CMMI because, yes, as well as CMMC now, because version 1.3 of CMMI is sunsetting at the end of September. So everybody and their brother is having an appraisal or wants to have one. But in the midst of all that, I'll be studying for my class. But the beauty is CMMI and CMMC are so, I want to say they're so well integrated in the sense that they're so much alike. I mean, my next 2 months, I guess, before my class, I'll be studying CMMC again, which for me, I've already been studying for probably about 2 years because my clients are asking me, oh my God, Maggie, the CMMC thing is coming down the road. Please help me. So I'm like, I better get up to, and so funnily enough, I decided to go the route of being a CMMC assessor and got accepted, as you just said. Found out last night at 10 o'clock. So I had to sign up for a class, a 3-day class on how to be an assessor, and talking to some of the people who are involved in it, like yourself and some of your other peers, it looks like it's a lot like CMMI, and not in just the maturity levels, not just, domains versus practice areas, but also in the way that we're going to assess. As you mentioned, you mentioned, I guess, habit and persistence, which we call institutionalization in CMMI. Those same words were in the CMMC documentation that we got, 1st of January and up the updates since then. So they still are requiring, in other words, not like ISO. Well, most people, I hate to say this, mistake ISO for I can just write a bunch of processes and put them on the shelf. CMMI, because we do look for processes, but then we ask you during interviews, during an appraisal, the second phase 2 of an appraisal, hey, Leslie, how do you manage your projects? Show me how you do it. Show me the tools you use. I would sit and talk to you and ask you questions. I would sit and interview as a 5-person company, or now you're 8 because you hired or 3 more project managers. I would say, I want to interview all of them. I would interview the project managers together. I would interview the people who are doing configuration management. If you've got a training person on staff, I would interview them. If you have subcontractors who are maybe coming in and giving training, I would ask you how you pick your subcontractors. So the second phase of, I believe it's going to be the same way in CMMC because it looks just like it, is going to be, first looking at documentation, then talking to the people who actually do the work and saying, hey, how do you do your job today? What do you need to do your job? What kind of tools do you need to do your job?
How long does it take you to do an average CMMI level 3? From soup to nuts, from starter course through dessert course.
Starter course would be first contact, so to speak.
Yeah. From first contact, from somebody calling you and saying, hey Maggie, I need a CMMI appraisal. What's the next steps, and all the way until the end where they are.
I would say, as far as time wise, it would take anywhere from probably 12 to 15 days for level 3. But CMMI appraiser's favorite 2 words is it depends. Depends on the size of the organization, right? Depends on how many projects, which we lovingly call basic units, they have, and how much is involved with how many people they have that we have to.
So let's say it's my company, like a small, because I think most companies in the DIB are pretty small. If they follow the same distribution as like the normal or US companies, we can assume that a lot of them are small. So take the average small business that has less than 50 employees. If I have 50 employees, how long would it?
I normally, average wise, variation involved. I usually take about 5 days of readiness review, and that's where I look at all your documentation as much as I can, because for CMMI, and again, I believe CMMC is going to be the same thing. If you don't have the documentation, how can you prove capability? Because again, if Joe goes on vacation or wins a lottery, then Harriet can't jump in and do his job because he didn't leave anything for her to follow. There was no training. Yeah, so that's what I do, is make sure that all that documentation is there. Because if you don't have policies, if you don't have the procedures, if you don't have the work instructions that came out of doing these processes and procedures, then we can't say that you're going to be repeatable. We can't say that you're going to be institutionalized, and organization-wide process areas are therefore habitual and a habit and persistent, because you don't have them written down. So first step would be the readiness review, where I would look to see that all these processes and procedures are actually in place, and they are somewhere where people can get to them, people use them, they're understandable. And then the second largest part of it would be what we call phase 2, the on-site part, where we do all the interviews. And then
how long does it take you to get through all the policies generally? And is it just you reading them, or do you have like a team of people?
I have a team of 4 plus me. The minimum for a CMMI, what we call a benchmark appraisal, and for 1.3 it was called a Scampi A, you had to have 4 people minimum. So the beauty of that, so everybody's looking at documents. I divide my folks into what we call mini teams, that everybody covers different, what we called process areas in 1.3. Now they're practice areas in 2.0. And so we divide and conquer. So
makes sense.
Yeah, 2 people together covering, say, configuration management and risk management, as well as project planning, as well as work planning if it's a services appraisal, things like that. And then, so everybody gets together, they cooperate, they talk about what they've got, and then at the end of the day, we almost have like a daily, morning, and an evening scrum.
And you're doing it remotely, correct, right now?
Now we do, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I'm almost like a Zoom expert now. I can do breakout rooms and record things.
Oh, that's level up.
I know. Yeah, but zoomed out. But so yeah, this past week I was doing. I just started one in China last night, 2 nights ago, and we're doing the on-site part of the appraisal. They give me all the documents ahead of time to do readiness review, and I sit there with the team. We go over how far everybody's gotten. If anybody needs help, as a lead appraiser, I'm mostly there to make sure we follow the rules. We have a wonderful rule book about this big that doing this for so long, I pretty much have it memorized. But so there's rules, and that's my job as a lead appraiser. Their job as the appraisal team members is to go forth and like I said, go for the different practice areas that I've assigned to them that they've agreed to. I always get input. What would you like to cover? What would you like to cover? Because it's a democracy. I try to make it fun for everybody if somebody has an area they want to cover. So I presume it's going to be the same way in CMMC. I could divide my team up. There'll probably still be a minimum. And the reason for that is that no one person can say, oh, you're really horrible with configuration management, or you're really great with risk management. Like ISO can, you have one lead auditor. For CMMI and CMMC, you're going to have the assessor with a team. Each one does, from CMMC has told me, you're going to have a team just like CMMI. So you have to come to what we call consensus, not necessarily agreement, but consensus, where we say at the end of each day at our Scrum meeting, yes, I agree with that, or I can live with it. We do it thumb. Sorry.
We do that at school. I do that at Cornell on our teams, and I'm always either like yes or this. Yep. Like I'm not going to fight anybody. So right. Okay,
what happens if you do this though?
It would have to be really bad for me to do it.
Yeah. So I think, so there you go. You understand. I take it like a jury. It's like we have to come to consensus. In other words, you don't want people leaving saying, oh, I only agreed because I was bullied into it, or I only agreed because everybody argued with me when I had a dissenting view. Like we could be like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and wear our dissent earrings. We don't want that. We want everybody to come to consensus. And so when we all leave the room, we can feel comfortable that everybody at least can agree to that. Okay. If somebody does a thumbs down, we sit there and we will discuss it until we all are this way.
Do you ever bring in somebody from the company that you're assessing? If there's like a naysayer or somebody who can't live with it, would you ever bring somebody in to explain more, or are you guys totally on your own?
Yeah, no, we want to know why. What's so the appraisal team is the one that votes, not the people who are being appraised. Right. So yeah. So if the appraisal team, and sometimes you find that I had once one person who was scared for his job, so he was because he was in charge of. This is a long time ago, quality assurance, and he was worried that if quality assurance had any weaknesses, he was going to be fired. So when we finally dug deep, he was like, yeah, I'm sorry. If we have any weaknesses, I've been told I'm going to get fired. So then I had another whole problem to solve, like talking to management, but or taking him off the appraisal and replacing him so he didn't feel like he was under any pressure to say a certain thing or to say something was satisfied when it wasn't.
Interesting. So you have a team of 4. You guys do all of the document review. So does that same team of 4 help you if we were on site in person and they come with you on site? Yes. And how long do you spend on site doing these interviews typically for a 50-person company?
50-person. It still would probably be 4 or 5 days because we have to interview all the folks who do these activities in these practice areas. We have to see how the person is maybe using GitHub and how they're doing configuration audits, how they're making sure things are locked down and secure. We have to ask them how they do this because now we've read all the documentation that tells us what they do, supposedly. We have to ask them how they do it.
And has doing this via Zoom made the process shorter or longer or about the same?
It's made it, I think, there's some good and bad, or I wouldn't say bad. There's some challenges. Is making sure Zoom always works. Right. It's connectivity issues. You have to make sure everybody's got it. It's kind of like those progressive commercials where Flo's like looking at the thing going, can you see me? Sometimes it's like that and you just start cracking up. But we tested out way in advance. The CMMI Institute has given us a new practice area to cover called virtual delivery. So we are required to test out our whatever we're using. They don't tell us to use Zoom or WebEx. It's up to us, but we have to test it beforehand. And we tell them, we've tested it 2 weeks before the on-site. We test another week before on-site. We test all the rooms that we expect a camera to be in because we also need a conference room to work in. We need video chat to present. We have presentations we have to give, at least a total of 3 minimum that we have to give them. So we have to make sure that works. So it's a lot of connectivity challenges. It's gotten better for me because I'm getting used more to the Zoom platform. So that's my ramping up. And sometimes I work with China also, and they sometimes have to VPN in to get good connectivity, virtual private network.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So okay, so your team, let's say your team is doing this via Zoom. And this is the on-site portion. You guys meet every evening during the on-site portion as well and do the same thumbs up, thumbs down consensus on every step of the way. Okay,
Yes.
so what happens at the end of day 4? You have 3 or 4, and you've wrapped up your inspection part.
3 or 4 day wrap up, we're starting to come up with something called the preliminary findings, which is a findings briefing. In the way I do it, and some other lead appraisers might do it a little bit different, but most of us do it this way. We have a slide set, and each practice area has their own slide or slides where it says these are the intent and the value of the practice. On top, it talks about what they want you to do, and then we talk about, say, maybe observations, maybe weaknesses, strengths, and what we found against the model, like how great you are, or you're compliant, or you have some weaknesses. So we talk about that. We call them findings, and we present that first to everybody we've interviewed only.
Wow.
Say, did we get this right? We interviewed all 20 of you. Here's what we found. You get to give comments. So we show the slides, and I always say, do you guys agree? You don't have to necessarily get agreement, but I want to see what they say. Because somebody might say, well, where'd you find that? We can't tell who said what. There's these rules of I know. There's these rules of what we call confidentiality and non-attribution. I'm not allowed to say, yeah, boy, Leslie said this. Whew, that's her fault. No,
she's really disgruntled.
Yeah, she's disgruntled employee, or she's great, and you all should be like Leslie.
Right.
So we don't do that. We don't say who said what. We try not to say what project that was. Sometimes when it's a small company, everybody knows, but you're not allowed to say. You can't go by project. You can't go by individual. You don't name names. You never talk about it. It's kind of like Vegas. What happens on an appraisal stays on an appraisal. So in that sense, we give the results, and they have their chance to ask about what we're putting up there. Well, gee, you said this in configuration management, or you said this in risk management, or you said this in planning. What did you really mean by that? And we explain it as a team because we came to consensus. So this is not whatever's on the slides is not Maggie's idea. It's the team's ideas. Okay, that's the beauty of that, because we all had to come to consensus. So I explain it, or I ask the team to explain it. We all try to explain it to that person if they don't understand what we're saying. And we don't promise to change it if they don't agree. We promise to investigate it further. We say, if there's somebody we didn't talk to you think we should have spoke to, if there's a document you have that says something different, please bring it to us. We leave time between the preliminary findings and what we call the final findings to investigate further if there is a need, or to look into something more deep if there is a need. So that's the beauty of CMMI. And again, I believe CMMC is going to be the same way. The organization, it has a way to generate ownership in the findings, because you're not forcing something upon them to say, oh, you guys are fantastic, or you guys are mediocre. They get a chance to look at it before you give it to the sponsor. They get a chance to see what you've done and contribute further if there's something else they feel you didn't check. So you get organization buy-in. That's really important in a maturity model, is to get organization buy-in. It's not the ISO lead auditor coming and saying, you guys were horrible, call me back in 5 years when you finally get it. It's more like consensus. And I know here's something I wanted to bring up, Leslie. With the appraisal team members, I like to have, if I have 4, because it's a small org, I like to get 2 at least from the organization. So it's not like I'm bringing in 4 other people who have no skin in the game. I'm training people within that organization to be on my appraisal team, because they know where everything is. They know how things operate. They'll give you valuable insight on the team to explain how the organization is doing.
Do you think the CMMC would incorporate anything like that?
I believe so.
Okay.
And here's something that I don't know if most people know, but the CMMI being created by the Software Engineering Institute, which now is half of the authorship of the CMMC, there's so much similarities. When I first looked at CMMC, I'm like, wow, I'm so familiar with this. The maturity levels, yes, they're domains instead of practice areas, but configuration management was there, risk management was there, training was in there. Some things had a little bit different names in the domains, but it's a lot of the same best practices. More with a security bent, of course, more with network security, firewalls, et cetera, double encryption, things like that, which you should be doing anyway for maybe configuration management. Think about it. And so I see so many similarities that if my clients are out there and they're already maturity level 3 in CMMI, they're going to have so much of an easier time just because they're used to the taxonomy and the codification of CMMI. They'll be able to understand CMMC that much easier, I believe.
Okay, so what happens? You briefed all the people who you interviewed. So you brief them, and then what happens? If they're all like, yes, this represents us accurately, what next?
The next would be the final findings presentation to the sponsor at a minimum, the person who, wanted this appraisal, the person who probably paid for it too. I would then, with my team, you don't have to, the minimum is the lead appraiser and the sponsor for CMMI. But I would always have my team there, and I would always ask the sponsor to bring whoever he or she wants with them if they do want somebody, if they're confident in the results and they're not going to be embarrassed or argue with anybody in the room. Then I would do that. We would give them the final findings and explain. There I can go into more detailed explanation because now it's become final. We're no longer data gathering. This is it. This is what we got. And let me explain it to you. We can help them from there on out. I can say, well, you had 2 people on the team that are going to be here with you. If you need some help, you can always call me, but you've got 2 folks who went through this process with us on the appraisal team. So the beauty is, it's not like you decide to read the final findings a month after everybody's left and you're like, what the heck did they say? I don't understand this now. Made sense when I heard it, but now that you're gone and not explaining it, you've got some people here in your organization who can hopefully read it with you, and you guys come up with an action plan. If there's weaknesses to close, you can work from there and make those people the internal capital institutionalization of training that they received during the appraisal, and they're there.
So if they have weaknesses that they need to close, do you give them a certain amount of, like the CMMC, the guidance is that I think up to 60 days or 90 days after the assessment, they'll be able to close those gaps. Is that the same with CMMI?
There is
close the gaps,
yes.
and give them a maturity level based on that?
You can do that too. There's a certain type of appraisal where it's like an abridged appraisal where there were some weaknesses found. If you deem that they can be closed within the same, and again, I'm sorry, I should know, 60 or 90 days. I've never done that this way. I've never had to do that route, but 60 or 90 days to close that weakness, as you just mentioned, and then you can go back and make sure that weakness has been closed. But I don't ever want to, me personally, I don't like to do that. I would rather make sure that's why I do such an extensive readiness review up front. Woe to the person who goes through the whole appraisal and then finds out there's not a document for that, because you should have caught that in the readiness review. So, right. Yeah, so it's a lot of time and energy on an organization to go through the readiness review and the onsite. So I would rather make sure I try and find all those weaknesses, at least in the documentation, before we go to the onsite.
Okay, so at the very end, you're briefing the sponsor, and it's you and your team and whomever they bring on site. So you brief them the findings, and they're like, okay, cool, thank you. Have a great day. So what do you do with your findings? How do you submit it? And then do they get like a certification? Is it good for a period of time?
Exactly. Yes. Good questions. Good questions. Yes. I submit all this wonderful documentation, the final findings presentation that the team has to sign, appraisal disclosure statement, the documentation that the sponsor had to sign, the appraisal plan, the roles and responsibilities documentation, and some other things that I have to submit to the CMMI, to ISACA, I should say now, CMMI Institute/ISACA. And they usually review it in 30 days and get back to me and say, okay, your appraisal, and the sponsor, your appraisal has been proved, and you now can go out and verily say you are maturity level 3, 4, 5, whatever you went for, and you have it for 3 years. 3 years date.
Yes. Yeah, same as CMMC.
Amazing. Yeah.
Well,
why reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. That's why I wanted to walk you through this process, because I think there's going to be a lot of overlap, and I think the CMMC is shrouded in mystery for most of the people who have never heard of CMMI, and this is all new to them. So I really appreciate you walking through all of the steps. I think this will be very illuminating to lots of people, to at least help them prepare not just their cybersecurity aspects, but all of the documentation, and mentally prepare for what is about to happen to the entire defense
entire universe.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and it's funny because I think again, if you understand CMMI, you're really going to understand CMMC that much easier. You'll be ahead of the game, I hope.
Yeah, so. I have no doubt, and I think that your knowledge and experience will be. The people who get you as an appraiser will be very lucky, because I think you have so much wisdom and knowledge to offer. So they're lucky to have you as a provisional assessor.
You're making me blush.
So is there anything else that you think we should talk about between the two, the relationship between the two, that would be illuminating to people who this is the CMMI is new to them and they're facing the CMMC and they should use to help get prepared?
I think I could see that looking at CMMC without any exposure to a maturity model in your past would be daunting. I think it might be scary to people. I think it might look like it's going to take a lot of time and effort. And while it does take time and effort, it's really honestly not going to be that bad. And again, I'm also, like I said, an ISO 27000 lead auditor, where I go in and just say, oh, yeah, you made it. And and again, it wasn't a team. I think you get what you pay for, in the sense that if you're going to do CMMC, make sure that the appraisal team is some of your own internal people, so that again, you get that intellectual capital at the end of the day to help you keep going on your journey. And don't, I just want to tell people, don't be scared. It's not rocket science. It's best practices. And does it take some time? Sure. Good things take time. You can have it cheap, high quality, or easy. Pick two. But if you want high quality, it comes with a little bit of elbow grease. But it does make sense in the fact that the maturity, it's not just binary. It's not you made it or you didn't. It's you go on this journey. It's almost like a journey of self help kind of a program for your software or for your service, or whatever you're doing. If you're a network security company, you're providing people with maybe some type of web security, and that's your service. I can see where this would be a lot of software as a service type work too. So I think it's daunting until you realize it's not all that crazy and it's not all that involved. So just don't be scared. We're here to help. We're here to help. As you are, Leslie, too. I know that.
Yeah, always. I answer free questions all the time, and
I know.
Yeah, people have them. I think this will answer and will answer a lot of questions for them. So I appreciate your time, and appreciate you joining me and giving me some inside baseball, at least for the CMMI. And I'd like to follow up with you in the next couple months after you've done the training, gotten your feet wet, maybe done your first or second engagement with some CMMC to see how it's going. Because I think everybody wants to hear how it's going and what your lessons learned are.
Yeah, that would be great.
Before we wrap up this week, I just wanted to share a few news announcements. 1, obviously, I've moved. 2, my hair appointment is tomorrow. And 3, the CMMC has appeared in 2 different solicitation announcements. The first one came from DISA, where they have announced an $11.7 billion single award IDIQ. Part of the solicitation requires companies to describe their CMMC level 3 or 4 compliance plan, and then they may be required to achieve a CMMC level 3 or 4 for contract award. The second solicitation is from GSA. This contract has been designated as a provisional assessment pilot activity. It also says that the CMMC assessment is voluntary and not for attribution. So it's interesting that GSA has included this requirement when the CMMC is a DoD-centric requirement. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
And that wraps our episode for today. If you have any comments or questions, you can email me at leslie@dibtechtalk.com and shoot me an email if you'd like to sponsor an episode.